Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Dick, and on behalf of my fellow Commerce Next co-founder Scott Silverman and Veronica Sonsev, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Today is Wednesday, June 10th, 2020, and our topic this week is how to personalize campaigns that resonate with today's consumers. Before we go any further, I'd like to welcome our guest speakers and panelists, Brendan Richter, the Vice President and Principal Analyst, Digital Business Strategy at Forrester, Yoav Banai, the VP of Customer Engagement at Deezer, Ken Kassar, Principal at Kassar Co. Strategy and Analytic Consultants, and Bill Schneider, the VP of Product Marketing at Sheer ID. I want to thank our speakers and to our audience for joining us today. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about some upcoming events. We're then going to go through some housekeeping notes to get you through, show you how to use the webinar. We'll take a look then at the 5th Commerce Next COVID-19 Retail Survey results. Next, after that, Forrester is going to report putting identity marketing into the center of your personalization initiatives. We'll do some audience polls, and by the bottom of the hour, we'll be having a panel discussion with audience Q&A. So let's take a look at what's coming up. Next week, we've got the evolving gifting economy and what it means for retailers and brands. Co-founder of Commerce Next, Scott Silverman, will be leading that panel. Of course, we have the CN Virtual Summit, and that's going to be on July 28th and 29th. It's going to be based on a theme of Path to Recovery. 2 afternoons of content, 7 hours. It's going to be something else. We strongly recommend that you check that out by going over to commercenext.com/virtual summit. So housekeeping notes for you guys. Don't worry about missing anything. We're recording this webinar, and we'll make it available for replay probably by late tomorrow morning. But first, I want to take a moment to show you where things are on your screen. If you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see Q&A, polls, and handouts. We'll be using all 3 during the webinar today. You can ask a question of our speakers at any time by going into the Q&A text field at the bottom of the page and entering your question. If you see a question from somebody else and you think it's a good one, upvote it. That tells us which ones are really good and the ones we should focus on. We'll try to get to them all. And finally, handouts are available as well. We have the entire presentation available as a PDF, as well as a couple of other pieces of documentation from Sheer ID and Forrester. You can see all of them there in the handout section. If you're listening to this on a recording, the document icon at the bottom of the recording will give you access to all of the handouts as well as the poll results. And with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Ken Kassar. He's the principal at Kassar Co. Strategy and Analytic Consultants, and he's going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on retail and e-commerce. This is the 5th survey in the Commerce Next series. Ken, why don't you take it away?
All right. Thank you, Alan. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. As Alan had said, I'm Ken Kassar. I am the principal, CEO, vice president, and secretary of Kassar Co. Retail Strategy and Analytics. Scott had asked if I'd be willing to help out as Commerce Next was putting together the 5th wave survey. Was thrilled to do so, and as everybody knows, you don't say no to Scott Silverman. We've been running tracking studies since February. And some of the questions that we've been running have been consistent since February. Some have been more ad hoc, and we'll talk about both of those today. Before we go further, though, I do want to make sure that we thank Sucharita Kodali from Forrester, who was a valuable help in constructing this survey and thinking about the insights that came from it. And of course, we want to thank the 75 retail executives that had completed our survey. Speaking of the survey, this was fielded between June 1st and 4th. We collected 75 responses from a diverse array of retailers. If you look below, we can see on the left, the composition based upon revenue, the types of retailers. We have a good diverse set of retail models. And then on the right, the category of sales. As you can see, we're a little bit heavy on apparel, which constitutes a large array, obviously, of online retail. To say that we live in strange times economically is probably the understatement of the year. Unemployment recently reported at 13.3%, considered good news. The last time, I think it's only once prior to or after 1937 that it had been above 10%, but that's good news. Apparel retail sales were down 56% in March. Overall retail sales down 18% in April. But the Dow Jones Retail Index is up 17%, exclamation point, question mark. We're getting a number of mixed, confusing signals that really kind of define the day. But the goal today is to try to clarify a little bit based upon what some of your peers are experiencing. For those with young kids that may be prone to emergencies that may need to bolt out, we'll kind of give you the key findings up front. As of May, the majority of online sellers are saying that they're above the plan that they had built before COVID hit the U.S. anyway. And that is continuing a positive trend that we've seen since COVID initially hit. Business optimism in May is at the highest level that we've seen in the U.S. among survey respondents since COVID hit the U.S. We are certainly finding, you'll see specific data around this, that retailers have been kind of compelled to make difficult cuts to marketing and e-commerce staff to support e-commerce, despite the fact that they are challenged to keep up with demand. And so in some cases, it's a particularly difficult scenario. The early results that we have seen from store openings are somewhere between mixed and positive. Retailers are definitely being cautious, and we'll talk more about that. And then finally, on the e-commerce fulfillment side, we've got reports that retailers have struggled with increased demand. And among those that are struggling, about half are getting away with it, and half are not. And we'll tell you more about that. So the agenda today, we'll start off by looking at our tracking data, the data points that the Commerce Next folks have been tracking since February. We'll then take a look at store opening or reopening perspectives and what we know from that, and then we'll take a look at e-commerce operations. We'll start, though, looking at business optimism. The question that we asked overall, what is your sense of business optimism compared with the prior period? And so so here we're talking about how folks were feeling June 1st through 4th compared with April 27th through 29th. And the signs are positive. 64% of you are more optimistic. That's especially so amongst apparel retailers. 18%, though, are less optimistic. That is especially the case in health and beauty. I suspect strongly within the beauty side of that, and also within DTC. DTC brands of all flavors are less optimistic than others based upon their experiences. I think on the online side, that has something to do with the price, with price points that online direct-to-consumer merchants tend to charge because they need to cover shipping and handling costs. Amongst brick and mortar, I think that has a lot to do with the closure of brick and mortar stores. Looking at causes for optimism, when we asked the question, how did e-commerce revenue trend relative to plan during, in this period, May, the 53% of retailers told us that they were running significantly ahead of plan. Net 72% are positive, and that's up from 54% in February. So we're definitely seeing increases in plans that are undoubtedly contributing to the increases in optimism. Clearly, a big part of this, because we asked specifically about e-commerce, was the shift from brick and mortar to online. The one piece of advice for you, though, is that this is a slide you might not want to show your boss. Probably better that they believe that you are a hero than that you are in good company if you are seeing that strong performance against plan. As optimism grows, we're seeing an increase in media spend. And when we asked about media spend, we weren't asking about online, we were asking about overall media spend. And we're certainly seeing that increases are beating decreases at this point. But the big winner is that middle bucket maintained spending relative to prior wins. So I would say that this is more a stability of deflated numbers than cause for significant optimism. So next, let's jump into store openings and what we've learned based upon the first store openings. Firstly, when we asked respondents, those with stores, and here we had 49 that had stores, which approach they're taking to reopening stores as mandated store closures end. When we look on the left at all respondents, we see that generally speaking, retailers are opening up more slowly than they're allowed to. 56% are opening slower, 10% much more slowly. But when we focus in on the digital first retailers, we can see that there is a pretty distinct difference there. 37% of digital first retailers, so those are folks that didn't start as catalogers or brick and mortar retailers, 30% are opening much more slowly compared to 10% of everyone. And this makes sense for digital first retailers. Stores tend to be a smaller part of their business. When they do have stores, they tend to be in fairly dense urban environments. So we do think that makes a ton of sense. When we asked retailers about their experiences thus far as they have opened stores, we're seeing that generally speaking, they're over or they've met expectations. 45% say that they're coming in over expectations. The thing with expectations these days, it's a relatively dubious thing, as I think all of us don't entirely know what to expect when we open up our email every morning. Net positive, though, albeit mixed. This is my second favorite slide in the deck. In my portion of the deck. And so here we asked retailers with stores which offerings they were compelled to roll out quickly because of COVID-19. And we see a couple of what may turn out to be pretty significant breakthroughs. First, 63% of these retailers have said that they began offering curbside pickup of online orders. I see this as a positive, albeit a reluctant move by retailers. Retailers, of course, would much prefer that consumers came into the store to pick up items. That wasn't really an option, but over the course of time, data that I've seen has strongly suggested that consumers prefer curbside to in-store options, and so consumers seem to be getting sort of what they've always wanted. The other big one is touchless payment options. 39% said that they have begun offering touchless payment options. And of course, there's a big question as to whether this is going to lead to a breakthrough. When we look at the consumer side of the equation, Visa is reporting 150% growth in usage of touchless payments. And so it may well be a good sign for a technology that has been really stubborn in moving. Others that were mentioned when we kind of dig below and look at the other responses. One respondent told us they'd begun doing virtual selling. Another told us that they'd begun using store employees to handle online chat. And finally, let's close with how e-commerce operations are holding up. So first, we see that on the staffing side, we see that 73% of those that we surveyed, of all 75, 73% either maintained the staffing of their e-commerce operations. 45% of those maintained where they were, 20% were compelled to reduce staff. Clearly tough choices. Omnichannel merchants, if you look at the right-hand side, and we've simplified it a little bit to cut grown no change. Omnichannel retailers were more likely to have cutback or maintained, or I'm sorry, cutback operations, likely because they've got stores that are suffering, that are closing as well. We understand the motivation here. It's unfortunate, but we understand that the business demands have been unusual. When we asked retailers how well they've been able to keep up with demand, and this is sort of in a context where we know that many are seeing dramatic increases in online sales and many are not increasing resources behind it, we see very interesting results. First, this is, by the way, my top favorite slide in this particular deck. 19% were saying that they hadn't experienced increases in demand, and presumably they're handling it fine. 24% are fine, despite the fact that they have strong demand. But 57% told us that they were challenged. And within those that were challenged, about half told us that they were challenged, but they essentially got away with it. That consumers probably didn't notice that they were as stretched as they were, but half of those folks told us that indeed they were challenged, and it was probably fairly apparent to consumers. Again, an unfortunate business reality. When we asked among those that had struggled keeping up with demand, and we asked for the reasons, really kind of came back to three things: principally supply challenges, secondarily challenges from delivery partners, and then thirdly, their own issues associated with understaffing. So that is it for the data, and just with some closing predictions that we'll make based upon what we've seen. It does seem that as stores open, the e-commerce penetration levels that we've seen will drop from where they are today and where they were in the core of the COVID situation, but they're probably still going to continue to be far higher than they had been. Driven by, and this is driven by changed habits, a shuttering of stores, but we do believe that e-commerce penetration in the U.S. has certainly been accelerated by at least a year, maybe 2 years. Retailers do need to worry, though, and pay attention to the idea that they are going to risk losing share if they aren't able to invest in order to keep up with this elevated level of demand. The relatively conservative reopening of stores relative to when they're allowed, we think makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, it is not governors that are running the economy. It is the consumer. Being in sync with the consumer is more important than being in sync with governors. And it does seem like we've seen accelerated adoption of a couple of different technologies, which is exciting. And finally, I'll just implore you to kind of keep an eye on these monthly-ish pulses so that you can continue to contextualize what you are experiencing. With that, I will hand it back to Alan.
All right, Ken, thank you so much. We'll bring Ken back for the panel discussion at the bottom of the hour. For now, let me quickly remind everyone that you can ask the speakers questions in the Q&A field. I saw one or two come over. We'll get to those at the bottom of the hour. But moving right along, let's give a big virtual welcome to our second guest speaker, Brendan Witcher. He's the Vice President and Principal Analyst of Digital Business Strategy at Forrester, and he's going to review the new Forrester thought piece, Putting Identity Marketing in the Center of Your Personalization Initiatives. Brendan, the virtual stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. It's good to talk to everybody today. I hope you're all doing well and doing okay. I show this as not a symbolic sort of gesture towards the old days when we used to go into stores, but more the backstory is that I do a speech a lot of times where I talk about why consumers choose the brands they shop with, why they buy from who they buy from, why they buy what they buy. And what it comes down to is basically experiences. And what's really interesting, and I think Ken alluded to this in some of the data, when he was talking about things like the e-commerce growth and that it's higher now, but it'll pull back. And again, that's because of a lot of forced behavior that's going on and things that are going on today. But what really hasn't changed, although I would argue the whole makeup of it has shifted, is consumer expectations. Consumer expectations have always driven change within the retail space. We're being asked today, unfortunately, to change faster than we're ready to do. But ultimately, when we create these great moments for customers, or we deliver the experiences they want, like in my example that I give in speeches where I talk about the need to have shopping carts when I do my in-store grocery shopping and how important that is to people. It's critical today to be able to deliver those experiences that customers want when they want. And that really is separate from whatever we're going through in the market. I don't just want irrelevant experiences because we're in a pandemic. I don't want irrelevant experiences just because we're in a financial crisis. I want relevant value-added experiences no matter what. Those may change, but I want them no matter what. What's interesting is that when we look at what it means to consumers today to deliver those, what it means for retailers to deliver to consumers those experiences, one of the things I like to talk about is the need for understanding each individual customer. And here's why. This stat here, 61% say I'm unlikely to return to websites does not provide a satisfactory customer experience. That is not particularly interesting statistic. Most people probably could have guessed that. But it's the word satisfactory that I like to focus on. Because to each consumer, what is satisfactory is going to be different. Because we all have different triggers. We all have different things that we like or don't like. For example, just from an experience standpoint, some people might like curbside, as was mentioned earlier. Some might like same-day delivery. Others might like buy online, pick up in store. Others might like, different ways of shopping, different ways of doing things. I might like comparison charts versus ratings and reviews, right? Each of us has that thing we need to feel confident, which is why there's no silver bullet. But that really does beg the question, like, what do we need to do to make sure we are delivering satisfactory experiences? And the reality is we need to do personalization. Now, personalization is not defined any longer as making product recommendations. Personalization is about making relevant, value-added experiences for consumers. And so, unfortunately, what we find is that most organizations that are out there today say they're doing personalization. In fact, 89% say we're investing in personalizing customer experiences. But 40% of consumers say the information I get from brands is relevant to my taste and interests. I should say only 40%, right? I guess the question would be, which number is right? Which number is right? Well, it's the 40%, obviously, right? It's not personalization if you get it wrong. It's marketing if you get it wrong, right? And so while you may say we're doing personalization, if you actually don't get the experience right for the customer, then you didn't accomplish personalization. And that's a critical difference in the way you might look at personalization and how to approach it. And one of the things that I find is that companies feel like they're doing the right things. They feel like, well, we're following all the right guidance. We're reading an Internet Retailer magazine or whatever, and they're saying to do this, we're saying to do that, but we're not having the impact that we thought. And ultimately what ends up happening is the strategy that you use ends up pounding on the customer in a way that you didn't expect. And you don't create these great customer experiences. You create disconnected experiences, as that 40% number indicated a little bit earlier as I showed that to you. So what do companies need to do? Well, first they need to understand the need to understand the customer. And when I say the that way, what I mean is that what makes me is far different than what it used to be. I don't really identify myself by my age, my gender, my zip code, my income level. It's funny, like when you say it out loud and you say, all males in the range of 40 to 50 years old will like to buy this product. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And we say it out loud and it sounds ridiculous and silly. And of course it is, right? And so this is why that 40% number is so different than the 89%. It's because we look often at segmentation, sometimes basic, sometimes advanced, as the North Star of delivering personalization. But what's really amazing to me is how many people don't realize that there's so many leading companies out there that have moved towards a state of individualization. They've moved to this ability to measure customers as a segment of one already and doing it in real time by listening, capturing, measuring, assessing, and addressing intent across every enterprise touch point. That is an interesting way of looking at it because a lot of people take that as, well, how do I build experiences for customers? So I really appreciated when ShareID reached out to us and worked with Forrester Consulting, and we did this survey together, which was really quite fantastic. It was a US survey, as you can see here, who we talked to, and you can see the company size and the model. There's also some information here about the industry that we talked to. Obviously, you can see 25% was retail, travel and hospitality, financial services, and then just a little bit details going under the covers there. But the important part is that what we found when we asked companies is that 1/3 of marketers say this is a top goal, not a minor goal, but a top goal. And another third said is an important goal for us in 2020. Now, this doesn't surprise me because as someone who talks to retailers about 200 a quarter, I would say, yeah, I hear this all the time. They are focusing on it. They are focusing on what does it mean to deliver a personalized service or experience. And this is directly from the study that we did. And what I find, though, is that when I go to sit down with companies and talk to them about personalization, particularly marketers, but also e-commerce professionals, I find that they don't really understand what drives good personalization. Because for every company that I speak with, I can usually find that they have a PowerPoint somewhere. It's about 100 pages long, and it's about their engagement strategy with customers. But then when I ask them about their data strategy, they usually can write it down on a Post-it note and hand it to me. It usually consists of, we put everything into a data lake. That's their whole data strategy. Or they say something like, well, we start with the data we have, right? And that's why that 89 to 40% gap really exists. It's because companies say they don't understand that data is the gasoline. Data is what drives customer experiences. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, we're a data-driven company. Unfortunately, I find that a lot of companies today are not data-led. What I mean by that is that a data-driven company can often be a company where executives make decisions at the strategic level and then go find people in the organization to find data to prove that they're right after the fact. But data-led organizations, they avoid preconceived notions about the customer. They're willing to say the customer has changed so much, especially lately, that I may not know what's going on. And so I need data to make some strategic decisions. Okay. Now, data-led companies are out there. I talk with many of them, and they're all the companies that we can't wait to hear speak at these conferences when we used to go in person to them. In some ways, they have different ways of approaching being data-led, but in lots of ways, they're able to be successful because they understand that prerequisite for personalization is understanding the customer. How do they identify themselves? What is their trigger points? What is their satisfaction moments? Again, when we asked this in the survey that we did with Sheer ID here, which I think was a great question, which of the following organizational challenges you have, if any, do you face when you're implementing or growing your personalization? A team outside of marketing owns customer data was number one by nearly 50% said that. They required them to ask permission before each new campaign and outreach effort, right? And some of that is because we make data so complex. We make it so difficult to get to. In addition, they said our marketing team is comprised of great marketers, but we struggle with data skills, right? Again, the ability to understand the customer in a way that really defines who they are. Our company culture value decisions made on instinct over data, right? This is using the opinion. And finally, our company culture doesn't value the quality of the data that we use. And a lot of this has to do with saying, when you dig in and under, you start to understand that putting mud in the tank of your personalization tools is what's really keeping you from becoming the company you need to be today. So what do organizations need to do? Well, if you want to create these great customer experiences, the reality is you need to take a step towards effectively and efficiently operationalizing data. That means also the ability to get data and to understand who customers are, who they define themselves as we talked about lots of times in the paper that we worked on together, this idea of a tribe, like what do I belong to? What are my key identifiers? Who am I really? Who do I say that I am? Who do I think that I am? And that could be different things at different points in the experience. When we ask companies, I feel like it could personalize campaigns based off meaningful attributes. We would be more successful as a company. 88% strongly agreed with that and agreed. As you can see, I feel that we could personalize campaigns based off meaningful attributes. Again, I would be more successful in my role as a marketer, 81%. I wish my organization would do more to identify customers based on attributes like life stage or affiliation. Again, very, very, very important stuff here, right? And so as you can see, this is the key that marketers, when they're being honest, they realize they know there's a gap. They know they don't know the customer very well, but they're doing their best and they're checking the boxes they say they're doing it. The reality also is that 80% of US online adults say they would feel comfortable sharing some kind of information in order to have shopping experiences personalized. In this day and age, it is difficult to feel like the customer wants us to know them because you're asking them to get to know them at a time when things are most difficult for them. But nobody has a problem telling companies what their struggles are if they think that company is going to solve some of their problems. And so in other words, what I do when I work with companies today, and we talk about this again in the paper that we worked on, which I encourage everybody to take a look at from Share ID. We do this exercise where we talk about if we knew X, we could do Y, right? That's the thing I work on my clients with. And it's the idea of, and it's the crux of the paper, which is that, do you really know your customer? Do you have an identity management plan, right? Or a data strategy that allows you to get to great personalization? Because if you don't, your personalization efforts are going to be minimal at best. Now, you, of course, cannot forget about privacy and trust when it comes to that, especially in this day and age. There's lots of companies today, we want to be a leader in establishing trust. But there's also 62% that say, we believe giving customers more control over their data increases trust with their brand. That takes process, that takes operations, and that takes, more importantly, and probably most importantly, the input devices, so that consumers, when they visit your brand and when they come to these touch points, these digital touch points, do you even give them a way to share data with you? Do you even give them a way? Because I can go to probably many of your websites and I would say, where can I tell this brand about myself, what I care about, what I like, what I don't like, who I identify with? Am I a college student? Am I a teacher? Am I what am I? And then what do I value because of it? Where's the input device? I guarantee most of you don't have it. You're going to say, well, what did you click on? Right? That's not what defines me. If I click on a bathing suit today, that doesn't define me, right? And so we don't really understand our customers. And unfortunately, many companies today are unsure on how to handle consumers' privacy concerns. 30%, 38%, 40% said that, let's say, about that. And so you need to be able to do that as well. So while you want to move forward, you may not be because of the challenges you might think you face. Now, this speaks a lot to things beyond technology. Culture can be a problem. People in your organization may say, I don't get this idea of individualizing customers. You may have people that argue people don't want to share data. Everything that I said, there's probably someone in your organization that would disagree with me because they have an opinion about it. But the data would say otherwise. The other thing that we talk a lot about in the paper is the idea of not only creating this experience in one place, but you have to create that experience everywhere. If you're going to actually be this kind of organization that can deliver experiences no matter where and when the customers want it, you have to think enterprise-wide about things. And finally, do you have the metrics to understand success? Do you know what the results of your personalization efforts are? Do you know when you create relevant experiences, what impact that has to your business? I find the answer commonly when I speak with my clients is no. It is no. When we asked in this same study that we did with Share ID, which of the following organization challenges do you have when facing and implementing growing your personalization strategy and tactics? We get these answers. We struggle to balance personalization efforts with other marketing priorities. Our executive team hasn't bought into our personalization strategy, and we lack a holistic enterprise-wide strategy. As you can see, these numbers are backed up. My earlier slide that I just showed is backed up with the data. And if you don't fix these things, you're probably going to be the same company next year that you are this year. And that's a problem. And so what I always encourage organizations to do is to think not only about personalization as a single initiative, but for an example, think about your omni-channel initiatives. Why would you create omni-channel paths to purchase or omni-channel journeys that aren't both relevant and of value? In other words, personalized, right? And so your teams need to come together. They need to work together to understand that understanding the customer doesn't just help your personalization efforts. It helps these dovetailed initiatives that you're also working on where customer experience gets impact. So here's the things that I took directly from the paper that we advise companies to do coming out of reading this and the data that we found is redefine what constitutes defining customer attributes. Again, I said earlier, if you think your customer defines himself by age, gender, and zip code, you are absolutely wrong. Customers don't think that way. They think of themselves in very personal ways. And your goal should be to be able to figure that out and create areas where customers can talk to you. Establish and execute privacy policies and practices, serve both customers and the company. You want to protect yourself, but you also want customers and consumers, especially in this day and age, to feel like you're taking care of their data, that you're asking questions for the purpose of providing value, not just to be nosy or not just because you want to send them yet another email, but more importantly, because you understand that they have limited time and they'd much rather you help them get along so that they can get on with the rest of their lives after shopping with you or even during. Third, establish trust by taking action on data the customers serve up willingly. I cannot tell you how many times I see companies asking consumer data and then they do nothing with it. What do you think that communicates to the consumer? All right, I'm willing to share this with you. And then you send them something that's horrible. I'm sure that you all know the company Stitch Fix, because we're all in the retail space, right? Stitch Fix. Like, what if I gave Stitch Fix all this information and then they just simply sent whatever they liked, right? That wouldn't really work, right? So you have to take action on it. And then finally, institute relevant identity marketing strategies. How do you target certain customers that identify a certain way? And that's how you're going to resonate with them. That's the key. And that's that next level of individualization that you need to get to really deliver those relevant experiences for consumers. So thank you for your time. I'm going to stick around, obviously, for more conversation, but I'll hand it back to Alan for now.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Brendan. Hey, for all of those of you that have just joined us, let me remind the audience that all of the slides you're seeing are available for download in the handout section, and that's located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. All right, so first question. This is where you guys get to participate. This really goes back to Brendan's point about trust being essential. Do you think your customers trust your company more than other retailers to do the right thing? Let's see here, still coming in. I'll give it a few more seconds. Looks like about a 70-30 split, yes to no. Very good. Let's close that one. Go to the next one. Compared to January and February of 2020, the pre-COVID era, to what level is your company investing in e-commerce? This can include infrastructure, marketing, and staffing. Significantly more, somewhat more, about the same, somewhat less, or significantly less. Give you guys some time to check into that. Okay, I'm going to close that poll. Looks like most, none of them are less, which is interesting. About a quarter are about the same, 50% are somewhat more, and a quarter are significantly more. Very good. Nice to see the investments are being made. And finally, this one has to do with next week's webinar. We always like to ask questions concerning the next webinar coming up. Next week is going to be the evolving gifting economy and what it means for retailers and brands. Scott Silverman will be leading that one. You can learn more at the bit.ly link below. But this question is, are you expecting gifting behavior for holiday 2020 to be different? More, less, new patterns, etc., than in previous years because of the pandemic? Yes or no? Basically, is COVID going to have an impact on gifting patterns for holiday 2020? Looks like I'm going to close that poll out. That looks like that's a resounding yes, with 92% of you saying that yes, there is going to be a difference. If you are of that opinion, I would strongly suggest coming onto the webinar next week. All right, let's close that poll. Perfect. Thank you so much for participating in that. Now I want to bring all of our speakers on. Turn on those cameras. Perfect. So I want to introduce two more of our panelists. Yoav Benai, he's the VP of Customer Engagement at Deezer, and Bill Schneider, he's the VP of Product Marketing at SheerID. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming on board and joining us today. Yoav, let me start with you. Can you give us a little more background on who you are and what Deezer is all about?
Sure. I'm Yoav. I'm the Vice President of Customer Engagement at Deezer. Deezer is one of the world's largest music streaming services. We are providing audio entertainment to our customers on a subscription-based, freemium-based model, so free with ads or premium-based subscriptions. And I'm leading all of our product marketing and customer relationship teams at Deezer.
All right, great. Bill, I'm going to give you the same question. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about SheerID.
Sure. So I work on the product marketing team at SheerID. We are really chartered with building and bringing new products to market that help identify specific audiences, like people that are in the military, students, teachers, people that work at specific companies, first responders, etc. SheerID helps brands build identity marketing programs to essentially identify and connect with these audiences so that they can build a relationship with them. And that's typically through what we call a gated personalized offer. That's an offer just for those groups.
All right, perfect. All right, thank you very much. Yoav, I'm going to bring it back to you. Like everyone, I'm assuming even streaming services were impacted by COVID-19. Do you want to talk to us about how it impacted Deezer and what some of the struggles and challenges you faced? I think the audience would like to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. It impacted quite a lot when you look at user behaviors. So our users are still there, right? They didn't disappear to begin with. The challenge was understanding what they need at that time, which completely changed. How users were consuming that content and what content also. So quick examples is users were used to listen to music on their commute time. Since they don't have commute times anymore, that completely changed. The difference between weekdays and weekends obviously is less significant nowadays. But even the type of content that the users want to listen to, whether they want to listen to more, expand their horizons with more educational podcasts while they're stuck at home, or any types of music that will help them calm the kids down because they're stuck at home with kids the whole day. So a lot of different user behaviors, and we thought we knew our users and what they want to listen to, and that changed. I want to say within 24 hours, but pretty rapidly, what their users are looking for and want to listen to on the platform has changed.
That's good. So I wanted to ask you also, what were your thoughts on the research? I mean, we just dumped a lot of information on everybody. Some of this you've just seen for the first time. What are your initial thoughts on that? Anything stick out to you that was of interest?
It was very interesting, actually, mostly for the reason of what we're offering our customers is essentially a commodity. The music is the same in all platforms. You can listen to Taylor in any one of those platforms that you'll go to. So really, it's about how the service and how we are serving and curating that content to our users. And personalization is in the heart of what we're doing, not just since COVID, but since many years now. How to collect the right data, which is a very good point. You don't need all the data. You only need the data that you actually can do good with.
Mm-hmm.
So how to collect data, understand it, and then put it into action to make sure that each user feels like this is his service, tailored to him, as music is a very personal and emotional product that we're giving to our users, and to really feel as it's theirs.
Mm-hmm. Bill, any initial thoughts on that research? I mean, obviously you're familiar with the Forrester piece, but anything from the Commerce Next survey that Ken presented that stuck out to you?
Yeah, well, there were a couple of things that stuck out, particularly in what we're also seeing in our business, particularly with regards to e-commerce. And it's, I think in general, it's really encouraging to see some of the numbers moving towards retailers feeling more optimistic and also seeing more growth in the e-commerce channel in April and May. And one thing that I wanted to tie together around both of the studies is that there was a moment, and Yoav mentioned this also, that as things shifted pretty much overnight with the pandemic and people's patterns changed, their interests and what they valued also changed at that time. And we had done some research with consumers in early March, asking them what they were looking for from retailers in particular. And the overwhelming response that we got was they wanted retailers to support health workers in particular, which I think was a really interesting response, given that it wasn't directly tied to something that they wanted for themselves, but something that they wanted for others in the community. And we had a number of retail partners that put together campaigns for first responders, nurses, and doctors to recognize and support health workers. Brands like the North Face and Vineyard Vines and Rothy's and others. In April, we were looking through some of our data, and we had 1 million transactions that were through our system, which, as a point of comparison, was a 40x increase from the year prior. And I think indicates the power of being responsive and personalizing a campaign to this group that's affected, which created new relationships, obviously. But I also think it also helped establish a sense of goodwill for other consumers, as other consumers in the broader population were looking for retailers to provide that support. And so I think it was interesting from my perspective on a couple of those levels to see some of the macro trends, and then also some of the things that we're seeing in our business, and then also this notion that Brandon was sharing around connecting with people based off of how they identify as having a really strong, powerful effect on getting response.
All right. So I'm echoing Scott. Can you take over while I figure this out?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? I know there were some kind of regulatory issues that retailers are considering, like GDPR, California Privacy Act. I'm, as it relates to personalization, that one's pretty important. And I think it's similar to that question around with the live polling question of, do you as a retailer feel like you're doing the right thing with your data? So I'm kind of curious to hear, from the panelists, what their thoughts are in there, maybe starting with Brendan and Bill.
Yeah, Bill, why don't you start out there?
Sure. I think there, what was interesting to me from the research was, first of all, how important marketers felt maintaining and growing consumer trust is an attribute that they're actively trying to impact and influence, and recognizing that the more trust that they have with consumers, the stronger relationship that they can create. And I think the other piece to that was tying the connection that the way that they handle data that they collect from their consumers has a direct relationship to trust. And we've seen in the industry from some other studies, like the Edelman Trust Barometer, if you're familiar with that, they have been measuring trust for consumers over time, and we're seeing that it's declining. And one of the reasons why it's been declining is because of concerns about how their data is collected. So I think there's a growing moment now and recognition that marketers are seeing between these 2 points of having really well-established privacy practices and helping grow consumer trust. And more to that point, as Brandon was sharing, explaining to consumers how you're using that data and showing that there's a direct translation between the data that's being collected and the value that I'm receiving. There's lots of approaches to do that now. And I think, one of them is as you're putting together offers for a group, like I was just mentioning for health workers, that's an opportunity to ask to verify that they are a health worker, what profession they're with, and potentially ask them additional questions on top of that to help personalize the experience. I think that's really the opportunity in front of us as we think about these regulatory issues. It's not just about compliance; it's about collecting data and using it strategically and being transparent with consumers.
All right, I'm not going to turn on my camera. Heaven knows, right? So yeah, Brandon, please take it away. Just want to let everyone know I'm back.
I was just gonna let me just build off of what Bill said, because I think there's what's really interesting is that I wasn't able to. There's so much data in this paper and in the research that we did. I could take an entire hour just showing that information. It was but along those lines, the 2 pieces of information I found really interesting was just how few companies even knew if they were being compliant. It was shocking how many people didn't even know if they were in compliance. And then another figure that showed in the paper was just how many companies didn't even have any sort of privacy policy in place or compliance policy with any of those sort of regulations, even today, which is shocking considering this is not new news. But the outcome of that, I think, is a level of fear that can cripple an organization, right? If you're that afraid that you're going to, break some rules that can cost you a lot of money, and you're not willing to do the steps to fix it, or not take the time. Like, I'm not going to blame anybody. Maybe you just don't have the time. Then you're going to do nothing. That's the challenge, is you're going to end up doing nothing because you're too afraid. And so one of the things I advise companies to do in that scenario is A, get educated and assign someone to that, but B, Work with vendors who help you with privacy. You know, like they do this all the time. You shouldn't go it alone. You should work with people that understand what they're doing. I know Bill and I have had plenty of conversations because he's in constant communications with his clients about privacy and trust and how to do that. He's a resource just as much as I'm a resource to my clients at Forrester. I think right now, coming out of this into H2, I implore you, all of you, don't try to do this alone. Find people that are out there that are willing to help you get through H2. We all want to see retail succeed. We all want to see all you keep your doors open. And I think just shuffling off or even outsourcing for knowledge in little ways here and there is how you're going to do it.
Yeah, that sounds good. Bill, forgive me if you've already covered this, but I just want to make certain. Did you mention about the privacy actually being kind of a tool that retailers can use? That it actually is not something that you should kind of shy away from and think of as, you have to do it, but it's actually something that retailers would want to do in order for them to take advantage of it and show, kind of put their best foot forward on it. Did you mention any of those things?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is being upfront on the data that you're collecting and being transparent on how it's going to be used, and that is a central feature, I think, to being a good steward of data is letting consumers opt in and provide explicit knowledge of who they are and what their interests are, and giving them a clear value exchange on the other end. If I'm if I want to prove, as an example, that I am a student to receive a special offer, I'm willing to do that because I know what the value is on the other end for providing that data, and I'm interested in starting the relationship with the consumer or with the brand. I think the other part I was wondering, you guys have a really interesting experience in the onboarding experience, as an example, right? Where as a new listener, I'm onboarding onto Deezer, and you're trying to learn more about what my interests are, and you ask me a series of questions about what types of artists and what types of genres I'm interested in, and then you can personalize this experience that is going to cater to me. I think that's a brilliant example, and while it's on the streaming music side, I think there could also be something that's applicable here also for retail, right? As you're kind of wanting to wrap around and personalize your shopping experience.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, personalization is the name of the game for us, and we have to get the service to be very personalized. The question really and the challenge is how fast can we get it personalized, and how much do we need the client to interact with us until we get to know him enough. And although we can ask a million questions, the attention span is not that large. So it needs to be brief and it needs to be to the point. The client needs to understand why we're asking that, and also make sure we're only asking what is really necessary to get him off the ground with a good experience, out of the box. Then we will be able to improve that experience and keep personalizing further within his interaction of that first out of the box experience. But for sure, those series of this onboarding session and taking him through hand in hand through the first steps and asking the right questions and looking at how he's behaving and acting in those first few minutes, hours, days is crucial to develop a long-lasting relationship that he will feel or she will feel that is personalized to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. Thank you for that, for both of you. I want to get to some of the audience questions before we get to the top of the hour. Gregorio Pinto, nice to see your name popping up here. A question for our first presenter. Ken, that would be you. Is there any information or data points regarding modifications to physical layout and procedures of stores, and in the case of store chains, modifications to the headquarters offices from which those stores are managed? So it's about a physical layout issue. Brendan, I know on our pre-calls you were saying that if there's ever a question, you can answer it. So I will let Ken and Brendan take this one. Ken, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in this particular survey, we did not ask about modifications to stores. So I will take my pass to Brendan and see what he has to say.
The one thing that I would say is that, for now, when it comes to store modifications, I mean, that's all well and good in a normal world where everyone's working at offices and you've got freedom to move around and all that. The important thing is to look at what's the now, what's in the near term, and what is next. You're asking about store modifications. There are minor things you can do now, such as, and you see them out there, plexiglass and all this kind of stuff that's going on, the spacing and all that. The question is, what's next, right? Let's take curbside as an example. Now, when I go to Lowe's, I went to Lowe's recently and got my order pickup. I went to a shopping cart that had my name printed on a piece of paper and it was duct taped to the hand, and that's how I knew that was my order. That works now because that's what they needed to do to get through the now. What's next is probably a little more digitized system with a little more organization to it. Will they get all that done before December or before code freeze comes in September? Probably not. They'll probably do the basics, the bare minimum of what they need to do. And then after we get through holiday, that's when they'll really optimize that. So the same answer can be described for anything, including store layout, which is know what you need to do now and just do that. Then get to what you need to do next. Maybe it's receiving, setting up a curbside area, setting up pickup area, just in case this comes back in Q4, because, oh my gosh, if it does, we're not going to be ready for it if we don't fix the things that were broken already. So when it comes to that, I am not seeing a lot about headquarters changing, but I am seeing people strategically approaching store design and layout differently, not new to store designs, because you can't do that in 3 months, but like how the flow of the store works, where things are located, those kinds of things people are working on now, but we'll see when that happens.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, we're at the top of the hour. As you can see, unfortunately, we've been kind of plagued with technical difficulties during this. I apologize for that. No matter how much rehearsal one does and preparation one does, sometimes it just goes this way. So with that, I'm going to thank our speakers. It's Brendan Wisher, Vice President and Principal Analyst of Digital Business Strategy at Forrester. Yoav Banai, the VP of Customer Engagement at Deezer. Ken Kassar, Principal of Kassar Company Strategy and Analytic Consultants. And Bill Schneider, the VP of Product Marketing at SheerID. I want to thank SheerID for sponsoring today's webinar. Don't forget to download the slides and research documents. And finally, thanks to everyone in our audience for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate your interest and support. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care now.